Welcome, everyone. My name is Ray Buchan with Success Partners. We're going to spend the next 50 to 60 minutes looking at Epicor Kinetic ERP as it pertains to costing, tracking, and scheduling. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. So this session is being recorded. You should have received a notice on your screen there to accept. So we will share this recording after the fact. I'd suggest that you also put your questions in the chat window and we'll monitor those throughout the presentation. And we will also have some Q&As at the end of this as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. I'm going to turn my camera off and let's get started. So again, my name is Ray Buchan. My background is a plant manager for 11 years, purchased an ERP system in 1997, and I went into consulting in 2002. I've worked with 3 different systems in my career, and Epicor for the last 10 plus years. I've got with me Monique Bartel, and I'll let her introduce herself when she comes on, but she is a strategic consultant and a solutions engineer with over 20 years experience in the Epicor solution, and she will be doing the presentation today in the software. So the topics, we're going to just do a quick introduction about Epicor Kinetic, and then talk about costing, look at costing methods, real-time costing, dashboards with estimate to actuals. We'll look at tracking on the shop floor through data collection, and we'll look at scheduling, finite and infinite capacity planning. We'll look at scheduling options and Gantt chart views. So that's the agenda. And just briefly about Epicor before we get started. So founded in 1972, head office is in Richmond Hill, Ontario, and Austin, Texas. About 4,400 employees and over 23,000 customers globally. Epicor is a $1.3 billion software company, but I always tell people, we've got customers that are 2 and 3 users, startup companies, pre-revenue companies, up to customers that are 600 and 700 users. So this is a very scalable product. You can start small, and my suggestion to people is that this will be the last software you'll need to buy. So Epicor is recognized as a leader in the marketplace, whether looking at Gartner or Nucleus or any of the independent studies. And Success Partners, so we're your local implementation partner. Founded in 2007, based out of Waterloo, Ontario and Greensville, South Carolina. We've got about 65 employees today across the US and Canada, and close to 400 customers in over 10 countries. Epicor is our business. We sell, implement, and support Epicor Kinetic ERP. And we're an Epicor Platinum Elite Partner, holding the highest status attainable through Epicor. It's a snapshot of our customer base across Canada and the US. And just a random sampling of some of our customers, everything from customers that do repetitive work to customers that are project-based, building mining equipment as an example, or heavy tool and die companies or metal fabricators, and even companies that would build hockey rinks. So if you look at the hockey rink here, this is where there'd be a project. They would manufacture the dasher boards and then install them on site. So a wide range of customers in our portfolio. One of the biggest benefits our customers talk about with Epicor is the ability to create their own dashboards. So if the data is in Epicor, you can extract it out and present it in a view that's useful to the user, or in this case, what we're looking at here is somebody on the shop floor. So these are pictures that I personally took from a customer of ours, where they've got about 20, 25 of these flat screen TVs in different departments. And an example in the bottom left-hand corner is a dashboard in an assembly area, where it's showing the customer the job number that they're working on, the date it has to be packed by, and then the various operations or stages it has to go through in order to get it complete and out the door. The one on the top right-hand corner talks about lines picked, lines shipped, and lines received. With a focus on costing, tracking, and scheduling today, here's one of our customers called Northern Transformer. One of the things they state in the reference letter they sent to us was that they were also able to perform our closed loop costing analysis on jobs in real time, instead of waiting for months for the data on how we did, allowing us to manage our margins more effectively. So real-time data coming off the shop floor provides real-time costing and allows you to action these items if you see any anomalies or things that are concerned about. From a functionality standpoint, so Epicore's claim to fame is the depth of functionality and the embedded nature of the product. So I mentioned that I've worked with 3 different products in my career, and those other products relied on third-party add-ons. So whether it was quality management, scheduling, shop floor data collection, machine maintenance, you can go on and on. These were typically third-party add-ons, and the answer was, well, we can integrate to the ERP. So with Epicore, it's rare to rely on a third-party add-on because of the depth of functionality in the one embedded solution. So one fully embedded solution, one source of the truth, one vendor to deal with, and we do promote a crawl, walk, run approach. So don't try to change the world overnight. Start small, get some quick wins, and then the sky's the limit. Everything's mobile enabled in Epicore, including shop floor data collection, which Monique is going to show you this today. We've also got handheld apps that you can download onto a device such as this Honeywell CT40 scanner, typically used in warehouses. We've got other apps as well, sales and CRM, time and expense entry. And a lot of these apps are available for you to download today if you want to, and play with a dummy database. The last one I'm going to show here, and then I'm going to pass it to Monique, is something called Epicore Virtual Agent, or EVA. Now, this is Epicore's introduction to AI years ago. And think about Siri on your iPhone. So we call her EVA, and EVA will welcome you back, and you can ask EVA any question about your business. So EVA, tell me about this customer. I want to know how they're doing on our receivables here. So there's a summary of that customer. Or maybe you're on the road as a sales rep and wondering, do I have any of these parts on hand so that I can provide a quote or an order to this customer? So EVA, how many of these parts do I have on hand? And she'll return that information. And all this is verbalized back to you as well. So she will speak back to you and give you the answer, as well as showing it on your screen on your phone. So that's EVA. All right. So back to the theme of costing, tracking, and scheduling. Monique, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to pass it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Ray. Hopefully you all can hear me okay, and you should be able to see my screen. Give me a thumbs up confirmation. Awesome. As Ray said, my name is Monique Bartel. I have been with the Epicore product quickly approaching 22 years. I have worked for a partner beforehand in the greater Cincinnati area. I was a direct Epicore corporate employee for 12 years, and then I joined Success, coming back to my home province of Manitoba about 8 years ago now. My role in the organization, as he said, is strategic consulting and demoing. I call myself the demo queen. Tour director is a much better term for me, but so I'm going to take you through what is our topic of the day: costing and tracking and scheduling. But before we really get into the meat and potatoes of those 3 topics, one of the things that I just want to touch on is our foundational structure. All of those 3 areas, costing and tracking and scheduling, are all dependent on manufacturing job orders. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to take a minute to explain our structure, which can be a little bit different than what some people have been exposed to. And as part of that, we're going to just take a quick walkthrough of, the look and feel and homepage. So what you see here, this is the user interface, and I've designed a homepage that's going to focus on the few topics at hand, as well as some KPIs and graphics. And as you can see, I've got multiple tabs along the top. Today's session isn't to give you a full rollout of all of our data keys and features, etc. But some of the things that I want to point out is that because of our data being fully integrated, you can interface and overlay a 3D image or a 2D image of your plant. And based on the current data that is being managed and monitored with their scheduling and tracking, you get these different types of color coding that goes along with what it is that we're actually working and trying to achieve. And here's an example of a production monitor that's in a 3D overlay, but dots that indicate different colors of workload. So we're going to be seeing how that information then can feed these graphs and charts for us to be able to do that. So as I said, we're going to go take a look at our foundational structure, and we're going to do that through what we call our job tracker. And that really is where we set our structure of a production order that'll get released to the floor. And I'm going to call up a job number, 2104. We have multiple naming conventions and nomenclatures for things. And as we can see here with this orange Jolly Rancher, it's closed, so it's, done and gone. But I want to talk about how we capture the operational side as well as the material side. Now, in ours, I'm just going to point out that this is for a quantity of 50. And really where we're going to focus on is the assemblies card. And you can see here on the left-hand side, I have a tree. And I'm just going to use my zoom to zoom in just a wee bit to sort of talk this through. So the assemblies is what defines what it is that we're making. And what we call it in the Epicor speak world is a method of manufacturing, or affectionately called a MOM. And that is really the integration of our materials. And you can see here that I have, a nut, bolt, and washer, kind of typical 101. And I have operations that are a part of that. Now, in this particular instance, those operations and materials are for that level 0, that top level assembly, which we can see here is a product DCD 200 ml. Inconsequential on what that is, but level 0, those are my operations and those are my materials. And as you can see here, we actually have a couple of sub-assemblies that then get brought into the mix, and they themselves have sub-assemblies, they have operations, and they have materials. So this integration of a bill of material and a bill of operation, which then provides a just-in-time approach of having the materials needed when you actually are going to consume them. And a good example of that would be paint. Anybody who does powder coating or wet paint, somewhere down your line, halfway through the product, near the end of the product is when you need to consume paint. So you don't need to order and have it on the shelf when the job gets started. And so this is where we take a look at that information and bridge that gap between what is needed when in a single flow. And if I punch open, in this particular case, the operation, you can see here that I have resources. Resources are people, tools, machines, could be instructional manuals. It can be anything that you want to be able to track and put in the system. In this case, I have an operation called punching, and that punching operation is going to consume this material in the system, as well as having an assembly line at hand. So if you can imagine, when I'm taking a look at all of these individual things, being components or machines or locations or equipment, when I have something like assembly, I'm looking at the bracket and a frame and a nut, bolt, and washer, and all of those things combined are required for costing and tracking and scheduling that particular operation. So it's bringing in the overarch of what is needed when, as articulated. Just to focus on a couple little things in here for the rest of the showcase today. When I'm looking at operations, notice how I have production standards and a standard format down here at the lower portion of the screen. This is where, when we talk about scheduling, that bill of material, that bill of operation combined is going to tell us when I'm making this amount of product, I have 10 pieces per hour. And we have multiple cycle times, whether it's fixed time, material, minutes per part, parts per minute, etc., that each operation can then control, and then it will calculate what the time requirement is. And in some cases, we're going to see where there's scheduling factors as well, which allows us to move inventory and move operations depending on product completion. In a typical assembly line where I finish one, I move it down, I finish one, I move it down. But the whole premise with all of this is that each one of these work orders, and I'm going to zoom back out now, is going to give you that perspective. The last piece of the puzzle here on Job 2104 that we're going to take a look at is on the activity tab. As I mentioned, a tracker is a read-only view, and in this case, it also includes activities that have fed and completed into this work order. And all the way down in the related pages on the bottom, I'm looking at assembly activity. And where I want to just point out is cost. Every work order in the system, every job that you're going to create is going to have estimated cost based on your configuration. It's going to have the ability to track those, not only the top level, but all the lower levels as well. And really the first piece of this is, where does the estimate come from? So if I just do a quick refresh on here, you can see that I have material, labor, burden, subcontracting, and material burden at that top level. And that's where we're going to go ahead and see how does that come into play. So again, just wanted to take a few minutes to explain our structure and how that structure is going to feed into the rest of today's webinar. So let's back the train up. Let's go take a look at the start of the costing conversation. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to go to the part master. A little boring, I get it, but we're just going to take a look at it real quick and talk about what are our items. So I'm going to go ahead and just type in that same part number that we just saw. We do have multiple revisions and options for all of that, which we can talk about another time. But right off the get-go, I just want to point out that this default site parameter is where we have a option. At the company configuration, the overarching setups that you have, whether you're a single company in a single site or multiple company around the world, there are standards and defaults. And in this particular case, site costing method is the first field that most people are going to deal with, which is, what is your costing methodology? Well, Epicor has 6. They are average, last, standard, lot average, FIFO, and lot FIFO. So ultimately what that means is that you have the ability, depending on, regardless of legacy system, is that for this particular item, which is a manufactured built product, is going to be based on a standard costing method. If I decided to come in here and just hit the plus button, any brand new item can have any one of those other 6 items chosen. And one of the things that sets us apart from Epicor and a configuration in the world is to be able to actually have different site costing if you are multiple sites. So if you think about, maybe I'm in Chicago and I'm going to open a facility in Indianapolis, I'm going to have that ability to come in here and be able to set that Chicago might be standard, but my location inside of Indianapolis might be average. And that's really where Epicor can shine, is that it gives you that option for multiple costing methods, regardless of location and interaction between the two of them. So let's just go back and hit the undo button on that and come back to my DCD 200 ml. So that is the first portion, which is the costing methodology. All of those methods are fed into what we call our individual components. So I'm going to just run over to the activity tab. And just like everything else, you can see here, I've got a cost detail section. And in here, I have a costing ID. And so that's where I was talking about. I could have sites that use the one or different costing methods. If I drill into that, now I'm going to see those same components I just saw on the job. And I'm going to see labor, burden, material, subcontracting, which is, purchase things like sandblasting or heat treating or anything like that would be PO driven, and then material burden with a total cost at hand. Epicor natively keeps track of these 3, average, last, and FIFO average, for you with every component, and standard is the one that is controlled by the finance team. Now, I have a computer science finance background, and standard is the one that finance manages as an operational control as a whole. All the other costing methods depend on the operational team to tell the system what they know, when they know it, and more importantly, the accuracy of it. So we'll get into that in just a few minutes when we get into the tracking portion of all of this. But each area, material, is broken into materialistic items, finished items, etc., these 5 components. In our world, if in the case of a subassembly, like we saw with this on the job, where there's children items, there is also a company configuration that allows us to match individual components. So if you can imagine, I have labor at a lower level and materials at a lower level. Well, I can choose to roll up any one subassembly in this case, let's pretend it's this $169. And when it goes into a parent item, it would take that $169 and make it only into the material versus component matching. So material to material, labor to labor, burden to burden, etc. So we have multiple ways of managing not only the configuration of a part with all of its individual components, but we also have rules on how that rolls when we are dealing with low-level codes. Now, my own personal experience when I was in an implementation role was 12 levels down for one particular customer I worked with. So 12 layers in a bill of material going to low-level code and rolling that all up to a parent cost. So lots of activity on that front. The other thing that comes into play, and it's usually a question that gets asked, especially when we are dealing with the components of finance people who are on the phone, here is, where does this all land on a finance level? So if you can imagine, Epicor has obviously a fully integrated finance system, and one of our control features is what we call our product group. So I'm just going to go back to the detail tab here by clicking in, and we'll be able to grab that item and go. And it's being a little bit pokey with my mouse. We'll just kind of ignore that and go from there. I have children home from spring break, so or summer break, so I've yelled at them to get off the world here. There we go. So moving this through, the finance team is going to control the elements at hand. And here we see here back on our detail is that I have something called product group. So when we're looking at costing as a bucket independently, but across the entire organization, every transaction is going to land in the financials someplace. And our product group is a front-loaded descriptor that then the finance team controls with breakouts for each one of those components, material through labor, burden, etc., into WIP accounts, cost of sales accounts, and variance accounts. Depending on what costing methodology you have, variance might not get hit. But at the end of the day, we have configurations and setup that allow us to bridge into all of those different areas. So knowing that's been said, lots of other moving pieces with the part master, but we're going to carry on. And now that we know how a part gets a cost on it and what methodology it has in it, we're going to go ahead and go back to the home page for just a minute and take a look at one big point in here, which is help and support. So obviously lots of rules that come into play. And one of the things I just want to add is utilizing one of our next generation of help tools is that if I'm brand new to the system, I could just type in here looking for costing and type in and see that I can see that there's using the costing workbench and costing in action. Or I can use a little bit of AI chatting where I'm coming in here and I'm going to say help with standard costing. And what Epicor has done is they've taken that next level for knowledge assistant, which again is another part of our AI initiative to be able to help with that. And you can see the triple dots. This is real live TV. And notice how it came back with a whole bunch of suggestions in here. And obviously I can stretch this out. And it gives me a definition. It gives me some individual buckets. And then it gives me some calculation elements as well. So whether you are on your third ERP system or you are now in your very first one and you're being exposed to it at the front of your role in the organization, you are able to quickly get help both from a traditional education perspective, as well as utilizing tools like this with hyperlinks, which is that little upward arrow and all these little red lines into transactional data. But I just wanted to showcase that just for a minute because it's important to know that it's not just a part of our implementation methodology to be the consultant in doing that knowledge transfer, but we empower you to learn the system for these areas at your pace, the way that you want to learn. Okay. All right. Now that we actually have seen a job, now we've seen the part and how we've configured it, we're going to go take a look at something called job cost exceptions. So when we're looking at real time inside of Epicore's four walls, is that when I'm telling the system what I know and when I know it, I get the option to then be monitoring and tracking what's going on. And so you can see here by launching this, I get a list of all of the active work orders in my system. And if I take a look at this one job, 2040, notice how I can see here at the bottom, I have the 5 pillars of cost: material, labor, material burden, etc., across the board with totals. And so I can see not only is this particular job on a little bit on time, right? We're ahead of schedule by 8 days. But if I scroll over a little bit in this, notice how I have a pink field. We're really big into color coding. Red is bad, green is good, yellow is, hey, wait a second, we've got some warnings we got to worry about. But I can see, give or take, about a 4 or 5% increase or actual cost in material for this job, yet the job is only 80% complete. So now I have a red flag, and this is giving me real time. Well, how did I get this information? How does Epicore know that there is an exception at this moment in time? And that's really where our scheduling and tracking then comes into play. This is the goal and the end game when you have a smooth running machine where we're costing, we're tracking, and we're scheduling, not necessarily in that order. We're going to schedule, we're going to track, we're going to cost, all those things mixed up. And I can see those individual buckets. And there is, if I scroll over a little bit more, there's other areas in here as well. And whole lines are red, not just an individual cell. And that is because our estimate to actual is also over. So not only do we monitor each component to find out where we're at in real time, we can take a look at the entire overarching with filters for over material, over labor, over subcontract, etc. So this is the type of information that is critical. And because this is getting refreshed all the time, I can switch from job to job and notice how it's giving me those individual pillars of graphs and charts on the bottom, showing me estimate to actual. Okay. We can use the same job tracker. We know that information over here on the right-hand side, I have different job numbers, 2429 or 2437. And I can simply do a right click and get all the way back to the job tracker, which is what we started with today. So inside of that world, and let's go hit on 2040, which is the first one that I took a look at with the materials. And so now I'm at job 2040, at which point we know it's not complete. We're only 80% there, but I can come onto the activity tab and jump right into materials and see where we're at with the material options. So I can see that I have some material issues and some adjustments to material. Again, we were over on that particular bucket. And I can also come back to the activity tab and go directly down to my costs to see what's happening in that world as well. So I can see those individual elements in real time. Okay.
So Monique, just to summarize on that, so what you're talking about really is managing the business by exception. The dashboard you showed highlighted areas where you may have a concern or want to drill into, and then right from there you drill down into the source transactions. Is that a fair statement?
That is a correct statement, yes.
Great, thank you.
Okay. So the other thing that comes along with all of this, and again, we're in the tracker view, is notice how I've got a couple red dots in the upper right-hand corner. I've got one on Clippy. You know who Clippy is? You're my generation. And another one on a memo. So I can document things. I can able to capture information on things, and then obviously see attachments, right? So when we take a look at the next portion of this, which is scheduling and a little bit to do with tracking, I have the options to see things that are going to be shown inside our manufacturing execution system, which is our shop floor data collection. The other thing that goes along with this particular one is that every job, regardless of how it is created, we can do manual jobs. We can create from a sales order, one click to create a production order. We have a summary of jobs that get created for stock purposes and master production schedules, but our native function schedules every single job. Now, we do have the ability to see the schedule portion right from here. We can see that this was due. It's a little bit late, but that's okay. But that 3-tier bar is actually going to give me that scheduled perspective in a Gantt-like view across the board. Now, I'm only looking at this one job at a time. All the operations that we saw on a similar job, if I extend this down, notice how I have some color coding, which again, I've already said, we're big into color coding. And I can see some things are green. I've got some things that are yellow. I've got a bar at red, and we actually have a magic decoder ring that lets us know what all those things are, where we're late, where we're maintenance jobs, we've got time that's been completed, etc. So we're just going to go ahead and close that off. But I'm getting that visual indicator of when this job starts and when is it going to be done. And for whatever reason, we've started this a little bit preemptively, which is fine. We can do that. And we have different icons that indicate different areas. So anything that's in that folder view is an internal operation. And if you take a look at this off ramp, this weird off ramp, that's a subcontract operation, knowing that there is time that the product will be out of our control, in with one of our suppliers, managing that. And you get that graphical view. There's always the information. I can bring in more than one job. I can schedule by an individual like we just saw, or I can bring in a project, which is a group of jobs that are denominated with an identifier, and you can see how it brought in this case, 8. I can bring in scheduling boards that are by individual people or resource or multiple resources at that time. So if I come in here now and just change my granularity to weeks, notice how I've now got this view of everything that's happening inside that time frame over the next couple of weeks. And I have the ability to take any one of these work orders and drill in and see what it is made up of on their own individual operations. So as I started the conversation about our structure, assembly is an operation, inspection is an operation. But if I take a look here, I've got those cubes, like from Cubert, and one of which is sort of a red color. Well, that is a materialistic view of a critical item or a critical path. If this assembly doesn't get done, then on time with its subassembly, that lines up with when those 2 subs need to start for that assembly item. And there is a risk of going red, which would be late. Now, the nice thing about this is that this is an interacting board. I can actually drag and drop things to start late, or if I can move it in. And so Epicor allows us to use these scheduling boards to not only see the health and where we're at with everything with color coding, but it also gives me the ability to be a planner and know that, you know what, we're going to have some downtime. We can bring something in. I can forward schedule and set a date. Now, obviously, I'm going backwards in time, so let's just not do that. And I can decide to ignore some of the other constraints that I've actually built into our scheduling items. So I can choose to move boards, I can move things around, and then ultimately what ends up happening is that once I've decided that this is the schedule that my team is going to work against, we then go back to what comes out of our manufacturing execution system. So I'm just going to go back to the homepage and I'm going to click on this MES, which is our showcase for the shop floor, as Ray put on his PowerPoint. And I'm going to go ahead and log in, or re-log in, or show up in here as one of my employees. I'm not going to save his password. So I've got John J. Labor here, and this can be run on a tablet. This can be run on a PC or a laptop. It could even be put on a phone if you wanted it to, as long as you have internet access, your cell access, you're good to go. But this is a one-stop shop for the back office, back of house, where it does production, it does materials. So all these individual apps have activity, package control, licensing, shipping and receiving, typical things that happen both for internal and external items, service for preventative maintenance, which again, we're going to tie that into scheduling and costing in just a minute, and any type of supervisor roles to see who's here, who's not, and what's the current activity and clocked in. So both of those are blank right now. But where I want to just touch on is that when it comes to production and the labor portion of a work order, we have a person and they have a work queue. When you are ready to go paperless, if you are already, great. If you're not, no big deal. But we have queues of work based on who your employees are. So John J. Labor is who I'm logged in as. He's a supervisor, so he has access, permissions aside, he has access to everything. He is a part of the assembly department. So like welding or like material handling or shipping and receiving, he's a part of a department for assembly. And his resource group is called Assembly Bench. And we have a collection of like activities. And we're going to swing back into scheduling in just a minute to see a shear and a saw and how that comes into play. Machinery, equipment. But as a human, I'm going to go ahead, and this is the priority of the work orders that are necessary to be able to get completed. And you can see when they're due. Some of them are due today, some of them are due later on next week and later on in the year. And he can select one or many jobs to start. Some of you might have one worker that operates multiple machines, or you might have multiple crew people working on one particular operation. Regardless of how your business rolls, we'll be able to take a look at that. And where that gets identified is not only with the job number itself and the operation, but the resource itself and the resource ID. And he's logged in as employee 100, but he also can be used in a resource for AB8, which happens to be the Assembly Bench resource 8. But I'm going to start his activity. And that's simply a matter of saying, am I doing setup or am I doing production? And by clicking on production for these 3 jobs that he's got going on, they drop off the queue. They are now in his active work, at which point he's just going to go ahead and go about his business. And Epicor is knowing that he gets paid whatever dollar per hour. If we just want to keep it nice and simple, he gets paid $21 an hour. The minute he started all 3 of these jobs, $7 an hour is going to get charged because we're only paying him $21 an hour. His cost is leveled. Burden is a whole other choice when it comes to costing. But if he decides to drop off at the 1 hour mark, say one of these jobs at end activity, then the cost is then going to get leveled over 2 from that moment forward. So we know and we pay attention to that costing element with inside of our world. A couple other things. When you tell the system what you know, when you know it, that is the key for accurate costing. This is the tracking side and utilizing the schedule on here's what has to get made when, but the tracking of, yes, I completed this particular activity. I ended it. I'm going to go ahead and say, how many did I complete? Let's just say that he completed 10. He'll be way over his utilization and we're okay with that. But the whole idea here is that by having activities and ending that, he's able now to capture cost. And if I take a look at that job number 2273 back on the tracker, we will see a few minutes of time charged to 220.73 immediately. And this is the benefit of real-time costing and tracking. So as mentioned, I'm just going to switch gears to go back to my homepage for a minute and go look at a multi-resource scheduling board, which includes, I can look up by a collection of like machines. So if I wanted to say, oh, no, that's not how you spell saw. Ooh, there we go. So I've got 2 machines in my production facility that are a saw 1 and a saw 2. And I'm also going to pull in a shear machine, shear 1 and shear 2. So what I've ultimately done is looking at a scheduling board that these are the activities that I have to complete with each piece of equipment that I've identified. And in some cases, a saw and a shear can be interchanged. And if I go ahead and view the schedule for that and take a look at the list before I do anything else, I have a handful of jobs that are in the system that need to be run on this piece of equipment. The resource ID is those 4 items. I can search it and sort it, S1, SAO1, etc. But if I come into the schedule view and take a look, and I'm a little bit granular here, I'm too far out, so let's just bring this back into hours. Notice how I have a lot of overlay inside of this. Well, Epicor allows me to not only overload, but I can set scheduling priorities. If for whatever reason, let's just say saw 1 goes down, right? It has a blowout, loses blade, whatever the case may be. And you can deactivate that resource and rerun your schedule, or I can literally pick up any one of these items and drop it to another machine. And so what you do is not only from a scheduling time frame perspective, pulling in or pushing out from a time, I'm also able to switch resources to something that has the same capability. You might have overmolding machines, you might have drill presses, and many of them that come into play. When I move a resource, the costing is then going to now acknowledge that when I'm logged into Shear 1 versus Saw 1, it will look at the cost that's associated with that particular device and be able to move accordingly. So I'm able now to confirm and push things out and drag things and drop things as necessary in order to make sure that my production schedule stays running. I can push things out again using our standard buckets of time. And notice how it bumps it all the way out into the future a little bit further. And that is because it had to plan around other workloads for those particular devices and for those particular items. When I publish this and I accept it, the person running the saw machine, the person running the shear machine inside of our MES station, our data collection station, where there's John, get his face out of there, will automatically see that as being part of that real-time tracking in the work queue. Now that we've done that, and I'm going to end his activity via the work queue, we have this, 2308 is another job number, and 2349 is another job number. I can come in here and select all. I can end my activity. He can either go for lunch or go home for the day. And when he is done, the clock out feature is going to end his time for today. See you later. And that then gives me the opportunity to go back into my jobs. And specifically, we're going to go take a look at one of those second jobs, 2308, as an example. And we're going to go ahead and look at the activity and come right into our activity for hours for our labor transactions. And you can see here, there's my assembly that John J. Labor did. Now, we were only in there for just a few minutes, so it's 0.04 of an hour at less than $1. But the point being here is that this is real time. So costing, tracking, and scheduling, we have all of those individual components. When they go ahead and work smoothly and you tell the system what you know, when you know it, will then provide that accurate, and you are now proactively monitoring how your company is flowing and working combined. So that is where I have my presentation for now. We have a few minutes left, but please go ahead and Ray, go ahead and open up the line for questions, and we'll be more than happy to take the next 10 minutes and open Q&A and stump the chump.
So there's a couple of questions in the chat window, and I just wanted to talk about my own experience with this. So before putting an ERP solution in as a plant manager, I had people punching time cards out in the shop, and they would write down the job number, and they would punch the clock when they were starting the job, and they would punch out when they finished the job. They would write the quantity on, and then those cards would come into the office, and they would get piled up on somebody's desk, who then entered them into a database. And about 4 or 5 days later, I would get a report looking at how we did on those jobs. And by that time, it was too late. So this theme of costing, tracking, and scheduling, and what Monique showed you here was, you release production orders to the shop floor. By collecting real-time data off the shop floor, it's going to update your schedule so customer service knows when products are going to be finished or complete. It's going to update your costs automatically, and it'll identify problem areas or areas where you need to dig into. And it can do that through a dashboard like Monique showed you, or it can be a push notification. Maybe you want the system to send you an email or a pop-up on your screen. All of those things are available. So costing, tracking, and scheduling is a theme, and I personally experienced the benefits from this, and hopefully that you will too. So looking at the questions in the chat window, the first one I see here, Monique, is the question is the due date for the whole job or that station?
Good question. So overarching, each job has a completion date or a due by date. I have a VP of ops with one of my clients that likes to scream at the top of his lungs, ship date is king. But each operation underneath that, in order to achieve that completed final operation due date, right, which is in this case, it's 8/1, has to be matched. So each one of that's the parent, and then each assembly operation underneath that also has time and dates that are due with a start date, run time, and completion time. So good question.
If you'd like to come online and ask a question verbally, just take yourself off mute. You have that ability. Just click your microphone and come on and ask. Otherwise, again, feel free to put your question in the chat. We've got a few more minutes here.
Yeah.
What I think I'll do here, Monique, is
Oh, no, someone has a question, Ray.
okay.
Sorry, I have a question. It's a little bit off topic, but I thought about this yesterday after our call with you. But do you guys integrate with EDI providers like SPS Commerce?
We do. We do.
Yeah, we also have our own EDI solution, so you can choose to keep SPS or you can use Epicor solution as a standalone or as part of the embedded system.
Just let her know.
Perfect.
And,
Okay,
and give
that's
her an
all
update
my
with my
question.
dad. and
That's
then
standing
see
in
if
my
she
head for
can-
now. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then I see there's a question about, is there a payroll module for work with the clock in and clock out? In the US, there is a embedded payroll module. It's usually for smaller organizations. In the grand scheme of things, sort of 50 employees or less. But what we do recommend is, and it's becoming very cost effective, is external payroll integration. So what we end up having is the whole clocking in and clocking out, the time and attendance portion of our data collection feeds into an external payroll, which is all front end loaded. You calculate your the pay type. Is it regular time, overtime, double time by each group of employees? So whether they get paid weekly or bi-weekly. And then it returns a journal entry. And there's companies like ADP and Ceridian. Those are probably the two biggest ones out there that people know of. Payworks, JetPay, Paycor, those are all ones that we integrate with seamlessly. And it really becomes where's the management line between administrative activities that are non-value add and being able to control your expected pay for everybody. But that is what we have in our options for payroll. So. You're welcome.
Monique, if you don't mind stopping to share, I'm going to share my screen.
Sure, I'll stop sharing. There you go.
Thank you. Okay, and just to wrap things up, if you like what you saw here today, or if you have additional questions after the fact, we'd be happy to come on site and do a discovery meeting at your office. I know we're already doing that with some of you. The key there is just for us to better understand your business and your specific requirements related to your business, gather sample information, and then come back and do a demonstration as a simulation of your business or a day in the life. We're going to focus on your specific requirements during that, so that it's, it pertains specifically to you. From there, if there's any funding available in your area, we're happy to explore that with you and provide you with some local references. We always encourage you to speak with customers like you. It's one thing hearing it from us, but hear it from the people that are using the software. My contacts information is at the top of the screen there. Ray Bucking, Director of Sales, and we've got John Pridich, who's our President. Chris Haid is Canada East, and Royce Gonzalez is Canada West, along with Mason Smith in the US North, and Jared Kerner. Thank you everyone for your time today. I'm going to stop the recording and we can hang on here a little bit longer if there's more questions. So please continue to use the chat and we'd be happy to answer those questions.